Hey everyone, my name is Amelia, and I need to tell you about the most unbelievable thing that happened at my wedding. Actually, let me back up because this story doesn't start on my wedding day. It starts way before that, back when I was still blissfully ignorant and thought I knew everything about the two people I loved most in the world. You know that feeling when you think your life is perfect? When you're planning your dream wedding, picking out flowers, tasting cakes, and imagining your perfect day? Yeah, I had all of that. I had the perfect fiancé, Marcus, who proposed to me on a beach at sunset with a ring that must have cost him 6 months' salary. I had my sister, Vanessa, who I'd been close with our entire lives, who was supposed to be my maid of honor, my best friend, my partner in crime. We did everything together growing up. We shared clothes, secrets, boyfriend's drama, everything sisters are supposed to share. When I met Marcus 3 years ago at a corporate mixer, I thought I'd finally found the one. He was charming, successful, attentive, and he seemed to adore me. 6 months into our relationship, I introduced him to my family, and of course, Vanessa was there. I remember being so excited for the two most important people in my life to meet. Vanessa had just gone through a bad breakup, and I thought maybe being around a solid couple would give her hope, you know? Show her that good guys exist. Marcus was perfect that night. He brought wine, complimented my mom's cooking, talked sports with my dad, and was polite and friendly to Vanessa. I remember thinking how lucky I was. After that dinner, Vanessa started coming around more often. She'd text me asking if she could stop by our apartment, and of course I always said yes. She's my sister. Sometimes she'd show up when I was at work, and Marcus would let her in to wait for me. Sometimes she'd stay for dinner. It became this normal thing where she was just part of our lives, and I loved it. I loved having my sister close. I loved that Marcus didn't mind her being around all the time. Some guys would complain about their girlfriend's family being too involved, but not Marcus. He always said family was important to him. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way they'd stop talking when I entered a room. The way Vanessa always knew things about Marcus that I hadn't told her yet. The way he'd sometimes smell like her perfume. But I didn't see it then. I was too trusting, too naive, too in love with both of them to imagine they could betray me like that. The engagement happened 14 months ago. Marcus took me to that beach, got down on one knee, and I cried happy tears. I called Vanessa immediately, before I even called my parents, because that's what we did. We told each other everything first. She screamed with excitement over the phone and said she'd be right over. She showed up 30 minutes later with champagne and we celebrated together, the three of us. She hugged Marcus and told him he better take care of me or he'd have to answer to her. He laughed and promised he would. What a joke that turned out to be. Wedding planning consumed my life for the next year. I was working full-time as a marketing director, planning a wedding, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. Vanessa offered to help with everything, and I was so grateful. She came to dress fittings, florist appointments, cake tastings, venue tours. She had opinions on everything, which I appreciated because planning a wedding is overwhelming. Marcus seemed less interested in the details, which I didn't think was unusual. Most guys aren't excited about choosing between eggshell and ivory napkins. He'd show up to the big appointments, smile, agree with whatever I wanted, and then go back to work. I thought he was just being a typical groom, letting me have my dream wedding. Vanessa, on the other hand, was almost too involved. She had strong opinions about my dress, about the color scheme, about the guest list. At the time, I thought she was just being protective and wanting everything to be perfect for me. Now I know she was probably trying to control things because she was already planning her own betrayal. About 6 months before the wedding, I needed to stop by our apartment unexpectedly during my lunch break. I'd forgotten some documents I needed for an afternoon meeting. When I walked in, Vanessa's car was in the parking lot, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I called out hello, but nobody answered. I grabbed my documents from the home office and was about to leave when I heard something. A sound coming from our bedroom. My heart started racing, and I don't even know why. Maybe some part of me already knew. I walked down the hallway and the bedroom door was slightly open. I could see movement inside, and I heard Vanessa's laugh. That specific laugh she does when she's flirting. I should have opened that door. I should have walked in right then and confronted whatever was happening. But I didn't. I froze. I stood there in the hallway for maybe 30 seconds, my hand hovering over the doorknob, and then I quietly backed away. I grabbed my documents and left the apartment like a coward. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe Vanessa was helping Marcus wrap my birthday present early. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. I chose to believe the lie because the truth was too horrible to consider. That night, Marcus came home at his normal time. He kissed me hello, asked about my day, and everything seemed normal. Vanessa texted me some memes and asked how work was going. Everything was normal, except it wasn't, and I knew it wasn't, but I pretended anyway. That's when I made a decision that would eventually lead to my wedding day revenge. I decided to install a security camera in our bedroom. The final straw that made me realize I needed to protect myself came about 2 months before the wedding, when I was over at Claire's house helping her watch her kids while her husband was out of town on business. We were sitting in her kitchen drinking wine after I'd finally gotten both kids to bed, and she started asking me questions about Mark that felt off somehow. She wanted to know about our relationship timeline, where we'd met, how long we'd been dating before he proposed, whether we'd ever broken up or taken breaks, and if I was really sure he was the one. At first I thought maybe she was actually trying to be a caring older sister for once in her life. You know, making sure I wasn't rushing into anything or settling for someone who wasn't right for me. But then she asked if Mark and I had a strong physical connection, and whether I ever worried that he might get bored with me since I was his first serious relationship after his divorce. That's when alarm bells started going off in my head, because I had never told Claire that Mark had been married before. It wasn't some big secret, but it also wasn't something we advertised to everyone, and I certainly hadn't mentioned it to her. When I asked her how she knew about his ex-wife, she got this look on her face like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar, and quickly said she must have heard Mom mention it, or maybe Mark had told her at some family dinner. But I knew that wasn't true because Mark barely spoke to Claire at family events, and my mom didn't even know about his previous marriage because I hadn't felt the need to share every detail of his past with my entire family. That night I drove home feeling unsettled, like there was this puzzle in front of me, but I was missing crucial pieces to see the full picture. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, analyzing every word choice and facial expression, trying to figure out what exactly was bothering me so much beyond just the invasion of privacy. When I got home, Mark was already asleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I grabbed my laptop and did something I'm not particularly proud of, but felt necessary at the time. I started going through Claire's social media accounts more carefully than I ever had before. I'm talking scrolling back months and months, looking at every photo, every comment, every tag, trying to find something that would explain this nagging feeling in my gut. And that's when I found it, buried in the comments section of a post from 8 months earlier. There was a conversation between Claire and one of her friends where Claire mentioned grabbing coffee with my Mark downtown, and how it was so nice catching up with him. Catching up, like they had some pre-existing relationship I didn't know about. My hands were literally shaking as I kept scrolling, finding 2 more references to them meeting up, always casually mentioned like it was no big deal. Like it was the most normal thing in the world for my sister to be spending time alone with my fiancé without ever mentioning it to me. I woke Mark up right then and there. I couldn't wait until morning because I felt like I was going to explode if I didn't get answers immediately. He was groggy and confused at first, but when I asked him point blank if he'd been meeting up with Claire without telling me, his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. He sat up in bed, ran his hands through his hair in that way he does when he's stressed, and admitted that yes, Claire had reached out to him several months ago, saying she wanted to get to know him better since he was going to be part of the family. She'd suggested coffee, and he'd thought it was a nice gesture, a sign that she was finally accepting our relationship and wanted to welcome him into the family fold. Then she'd texted him a few more times, suggesting they meet up again, saying she had some concerns about me that she wanted to discuss with him privately. Sister to future brother-in-law kind of stuff. He swore nothing inappropriate had happened, that they'd just talked about general things, about me, about the wedding, about his job and her kids. He said he hadn't mentioned it to me because he knew how complicated my relationship with Claire was, and he didn't want to cause drama or make me feel like he was taking her side or developing some kind of separate relationship with her. That would make me uncomfortable. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because Mark had never given me any reason to doubt him before, and our relationship was built on trust and honesty. But something still felt wrong about the whole situation. And the fact that he'd hidden it from me, even with good intentions, made me question what else I might not know. I asked him to show me his phone, which I'd never done before in our entire relationship, because I'm not that person who needs to monitor their partner's every message and call. He handed it over without hesitation, which was a good sign. But when I went to his messages and searched for Claire's name, I found way more conversations than just the few meetups he'd admitted to. They'd been texting fairly regularly for months. Not every day or anything that would constitute an emotional affair, but enough that it was clear they had developed some kind of friendship or rapport that I'd been completely excluded from. The messages themselves seemed innocent enough on the surface. Lots of stuff about wedding planning. Claire asking his opinion on gift ideas for me, her sending him funny memes, him asking advice about dealing with my stress levels as the wedding approached. But there was also this uncomfortable undertone of familiarity and inside jokes that made my stomach turn. Like they had this whole separate relationship dynamic that existed in a space where I didn't exist. The worst part, the part that made me feel physically sick, was finding a message from Claire sent just 2 weeks earlier, where she told Mark that she hoped he knew what he was getting into marrying me. That I had always been the dramatic one in the family, and that if he ever needed someone to talk to about the challenges of dealing with my personality, she was there for him. She literally positioned herself as his confidant against me, his future wife, creating this narrative where she was the reasonable, understanding sister and I was the difficult, problematic one he'd have to learn to manage. And Mark's response, instead of defending me or shutting that down immediately, was just a simple acknowledgement that all relationships take work and he was committed to making it work with me. He didn't call her out for being inappropriate or tell her that talking about me behind my back was not okay. He just accepted her premise that I was somehow difficult and moved on with the conversation like that was a perfectly normal thing for my sister to say about me to my fiancé. I honestly don't remember much of the rest of that night because I think I went into some kind of shock or emotional shutdown mode. Mark kept trying to apologize, saying he saw now how inappropriate the whole thing was, and that he should have told me about it from the beginning and should have shut down Claire's attempts to insert herself between us. He explained that he'd grown up as an only child and didn't really understand sibling dynamics, especially complicated ones like mine with Claire, so he'd genuinely thought he was just being friendly and open to getting to know my family better. He said he'd never seen Claire's behavior as flirtatious or manipulative, that he'd taken everything she said at face value because he didn't have the years of context and history that I had with her. Part of me understood where he was coming from, and believed that his intentions had been good, even if his judgment had been terrible. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been betrayed by the two people who were supposed to be closest to me in completely different ways. Claire had done exactly what I'd always feared she would do, tried to take something of mine and make it about her. Tried to create a connection with Mark that excluded me and positioned her as the more desirable or at least more understanding sister. And Mark had let it happen, had participated in it, had kept secrets from me even if those secrets seemed innocent in his mind. Here's part 3 in pure paragraph format. The next morning I called in sick to work because there was no way I could function normally after the night I'd just had, and I needed time to think clearly about what I was going to do with this information. Breaking up with Mark 2 months before the wedding seemed extreme, especially since I didn't actually believe he'd physically cheated on me or had romantic feelings for Claire. But I also couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened and walk down the aisle like everything was perfect when I felt this fundamental trust had been broken. I decided I needed more information before making any major decisions, so I did something that some people might consider crazy but felt absolutely necessary to me at the time. I hired a private investigator to follow both Mark and Claire for the next 2 weeks to see if they were still meeting up and to find out exactly what the nature of their relationship was. I know how that sounds. I know it seems paranoid and like something out of a thriller movie, but I genuinely needed to know if I was overreacting to innocent coffee meetups or if there was something more sinister going on that Mark wasn't admitting to even when directly confronted. The private investigator's name was Dana, and she was this no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd apparently seen every kind of cheating and deception imaginable in her 20-year career. When I met with her and explained the situation, she didn't seem at all surprised or shocked. She just nodded knowingly and said that sibling betrayal cases were actually more common than people realized and often more emotionally devastating than regular cheating scenarios because of the family dynamics involved. She asked me specific questions about Claire and Mark's schedules, their usual hangout spots, and whether I wanted just surveillance or if I wanted her to try to create situations where she could observe them interacting. I told her I just wanted the truth, whatever that looked like, and that I needed photo or video evidence because otherwise I'd always wonder if I was being paranoid or if my instincts were right. She quoted me a price that made me wince, but I handed over my credit card anyway, because at this point I needed answers more than I needed financial stability, and we agreed she'd start surveillance immediately and report back to me within 2 weeks with whatever she found. Those 2 weeks were absolutely torturous because I had to pretend everything was normal while internally I was completely falling apart, wondering what Dana was discovering. I still went to work, still attended wedding planning meetings, still had dinners with Mark where we talked about honeymoon plans and discussed seating arrangements for the reception. He thought we'd moved past the Claire situation after several long conversations where he'd apologized profusely and promised complete transparency going forward. He'd even offered to block Claire's number and cut off all communication with her except for necessary family events. But I'd told him that wasn't needed because I didn't want to seem controlling or create more family drama before the wedding. The truth was, I wanted him to have full access to communicate with her, so Dana could document whatever was happening between them without any interference from me. I also had to interact with Claire during this time, including attending my nephew's birthday party, where she acted like the most loving, supportive sister in the world, asking about my dress alterations and whether I was getting nervous about the big day and telling everyone within earshot how proud she was of me for finding such a great guy like Mark. On day 12 of the surveillance, Dana called me and asked if we could meet in person rather than discussing her findings over the phone, which immediately made my heart drop into my stomach, because I knew that meant she'd found something significant. We met at a coffee shop across town where no one I knew would see us, and she slid a manila envelope across the table to me with an expression that was somehow both sympathetic and professionally neutral. Inside that envelope were dozens of photos and a flash drive containing video footage that confirmed my worst fears, while somehow still managing to surprise me with just how brazen Claire had been. The photos showed Mark and Claire meeting up at least 5 different times during those 2 weeks alone, despite Mark having told me after our confrontation that he'd stopped communicating with her privately. They met at coffee shops, at a park downtown, at a wine bar, and most damningly, at a hotel restaurant where the photos showed them sitting very close together, Claire's hand on Mark's arm, both of them laughing in a way that looked far too intimate for future siblings-in-law who were supposedly just being friendly. But the photos were nothing compared to what was on the video footage. Dana had managed to get audio recording from one of their meetups at an outdoor restaurant patio where she'd been sitting close enough to capture their conversation, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Claire was telling Mark that she'd made a mistake marrying her husband Tom, that she'd been young and hadn't known what she really wanted, and that meeting Mark had made her realize what she'd been missing in her own marriage. She said that in another life, in another set of circumstances, she could see herself with someone exactly like him, someone ambitious and passionate and emotionally intelligent in ways her husband wasn't. And Mark, instead of immediately shutting this down and walking away, was entertaining the conversation, asking her what she meant, and whether she was happy in her marriage and whether she'd ever considered if she'd made the wrong choice. He wasn't encouraging her exactly, but he also wasn't discouraging her. He was just listening and engaging and creating space for this completely inappropriate conversation to continue. Then came the part of the video that changed everything. The part that made my decision about what to do next crystal clear. Claire leaned in close to Mark, so close that their faces were only inches apart. And she told him that she knew he felt the connection between them too, that she could tell by the way he looked at her, and the way he always responded to her messages, and the way he kept agreeing to meet up with her even though he knew it would upset me if I found out. She said that maybe they'd met at the wrong time, that if she'd met him before I had, things could have been so different. And then she kissed him. Right there on that patio, my sister kissed my fiancé less than 2 months before my wedding. It wasn't a long kiss, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, but it was unmistakably intentional and romantic. Not some friendly peck on the cheek that could be misinterpreted. And Mark's reaction, that's what really destroyed me. He didn't immediately pull away in shock and disgust. He didn't stand up and leave. He didn't tell her she was completely out of line and that this could never happen again. He sat there for a moment after the kiss ended, looking at her with this expression I couldn't quite read, before finally saying that this was complicated and that they shouldn't be doing this, and that he loved me and was committed to marrying me. Claire's response was to laugh. Actually laugh and say that of course he loved me. She wasn't trying to steal him away or ruin the wedding. She just wanted him to know that the option was there if he ever changed his mind, that she would be waiting for him whenever he realized he'd chosen the wrong sister. She said it so casually, like she was talking about restaurant options or movie choices, not actively trying to sabotage her own sister's relationship and marriage. She told him that after the wedding, after things settled down and the honeymoon phase wore off and he started seeing all my flaws and insecurities up close every single day, he should remember that conversation and remember that kiss and know that he had an alternative, a better option, someone who really understood him. And then she got up, kissed him on the cheek like nothing monumental had just happened, and walked away, leaving Mark sitting there alone, looking confused and conflicted. The video showed him sitting at that table for another 10 minutes after she left, just staring into space, clearly processing what had just happened and probably trying to decide what to do about it. I watched that video approximately 30 times in the coffee shop with Dana sitting quietly across from me, letting me process everything I was seeing and hearing. Each time I watched it, I noticed new details that made it worse. The way Claire had strategically chosen an outdoor patio, where they'd feel more private, but where Dana could still record them. The way she'd dressed in a low-cut top and had her hair done like she was on a date. The way Mark had leaned in when she was talking instead of maintaining distance. The way he'd touched her hand briefly when making some point in their conversation before the kiss happened. This wasn't some innocent friendship that had accidentally crossed a line. This was a calculated seduction attempt by my sister, and while Mark hadn't fully participated, he also hadn't done nearly enough to stop it or distance himself from it. When I finally looked up from my phone where I'd been watching the video, Dana asked me what I wanted to do with this information. Whether I was going to confront them or call off the wedding, or what my plan was moving forward. That's when the idea came to me. The idea that would ultimately become the most talked about moment of my entire wedding, and possibly my entire life. I wasn't going to call off the wedding, and I wasn't going to confront them privately where they could make excuses or try to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting or misinterpreting what I'd seen. I was going to let the wedding proceed exactly as planned. Let Claire show up in whatever outfit she'd chosen. Let Mark stand at that altar thinking he'd gotten away with his secret coffee dates and hidden conversations. And then at the reception, when everyone was gathered together celebrating our marriage, I was going to play that video for every single person in attendance to see. I wanted my parents to see what their golden child Claire had been doing behind my back. I wanted Mark's family to see what kind of man their son really was. I wanted all our friends to witness the betrayal. And most of all, I wanted Claire to experience the public humiliation and exposure that she'd spent her entire life avoiding by always managing to come out looking perfect and innocent while I was painted as dramatic or difficult. The remaining 6 weeks before the wedding were the greatest acting performance of my entire life because I had to pretend absolutely nothing was wrong while secretly planning the most epic exposure in wedding reception history. I told Dana I wanted copies of everything, every photo, every video, every piece of documentation she had from her surveillance, and I wanted it organized in a way that would be clear and undeniable to anyone watching. She understood exactly what I was planning without me having to spell it out, and she told me she'd create a video compilation that told the complete story chronologically, so there could be no confusion or alternative explanations. I paid her final invoice plus a generous bonus for the psychological support she'd provided throughout this nightmare. And then I went home to continue living with a man who had no idea that I knew about his secret meetings and that kiss with my sister. Mark kept trying to be extra attentive and loving during those weeks, probably feeling guilty about what had happened, even though he'd never confessed it to me, bringing me flowers randomly and taking me out to nice dinners and telling me how excited he was to marry me and start our life together. Every sweet gesture felt like another knife in my back because I knew the truth behind his sudden devotion. Meanwhile, Claire was ramping up her involvement in wedding preparations despite my repeated attempts to keep her at arm's length. She threw me a bridal shower that was really more about showcasing her party planning skills than celebrating me, complete with a slideshow of photos from our childhood where she'd somehow managed to choose pictures where she looked amazing and I looked awkward or unflattering. She gave a toast at the shower about how she'd always looked out for her little sister and how proud she was to see me finding happiness. And everyone in the room was dabbing their eyes with tissues while I sat there knowing what a complete fraud she was. She also kept asking questions about the reception timeline, specifically when speeches would happen, and whether we were planning any special surprises or video tributes, which in retrospect was probably her way of making sure she knew exactly when to expect attention to be focused elsewhere, so she could make her grand entrance in whatever outfit she'd chosen. I played along perfectly, telling her we were keeping things simple and traditional, just the standard first dance, cake cutting, and a few toasts from the wedding party, nothing unexpected or dramatic planned. The week before the wedding, Claire finally revealed what she'd be wearing to the ceremony, and I honestly wasn't even surprised when I saw the photos she posted on social media showing her in a fitting room wearing a floor-length champagne-colored dress that was so close to white it might as well have been ivory. The dress was gorgeous, I'll admit that. Form-fitting with delicate beading and a low back, the kind of dress that would absolutely photograph as white in most lighting and would definitely draw attention away from the bride. She'd captioned the photo something cutesy about finding the perfect dress to celebrate her baby sister's big day, with hashtags about family and love and sisterhood that made me want to throw my phone across the room. My bridesmaids were immediately texting me in outrage, asking if I'd seen Claire's post and whether I wanted them to say something to her or stage some kind of intervention. But I told them all to let it go, that it wasn't worth the drama and that I didn't want to give Claire the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. What I didn't tell them was that I was actually thrilled she'd chosen that dress because it would make the reception video that much more impactful when everyone could see her, sitting there in her bride-adjacent outfit while watching footage of her kissing my fiancé. I had one moment of doubt about my plan 3 days before the wedding when my mom called me crying, saying she'd heard from one of my bridesmaids about Claire's dress choice and she wanted me to know that she'd tried talking to Claire about it, but Claire had insisted the dress was perfectly appropriate and that I was being oversensitive if I had a problem with it. My mom begged me not to let this create a rift in the family, reminded me that Claire had included me in her wedding despite some tensions we'd had at the time, and suggested that maybe I was letting wedding stress make me more reactive than I needed to be. That phone call almost broke me because it was such a perfect example of how my entire life. Claire's bad behavior had been minimized and explained away while I was expected to be understanding and accommodating and mature enough to rise above it. I almost told my mom everything right then, almost sent her the video and the photos and let her see what her perfect daughter had really been doing. But I held back because I wanted the reveal to happen exactly as I'd planned it, with maximum impact and no opportunity for Claire to spin the narrative or prepare a defense ahead of time. The wedding day itself was surreal because I was simultaneously genuinely happy to be marrying Mark, despite everything, and also terrified and exhilarated about what was going to happen at the reception. I'd decided to go through with the marriage because the video had shown Mark ultimately rejecting Claire's advances, even if he hadn't handled the situation perfectly. And we'd had long conversations after I'd secretly discovered everything where he'd recommended couples counseling and committed to complete transparency. Not that he knew I already had complete transparency via Dana's surveillance footage. I figured we could work through his poor judgment and boundary issues, but only after Claire faced consequences for her actions in the most public way possible. So I walked down that aisle in my beautiful dress, saw Mark waiting for me with tears in his eyes, and said my vows meaning every word, while also knowing that in a few hours everything was going to explode in the most spectacular way. And yes, Claire was sitting in the third row wearing that champagne dress that looked white in the church lighting, with a smile on her face like she'd accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do. The ceremony went off perfectly. No objections or dramatic moments. Just a beautiful traditional wedding with all our family and friends watching as we promised to love each other for better or worse. The irony of those vows wasn't lost on me given what was about to happen at the reception. We took photos for what felt like hours, including family portraits where I had to stand next to Claire and smile like we were the loving sisters everyone thought we were. And she actually had the audacity to whisper to me during one of those photos that she was so happy for me and that Mark was such a great guy, and I was so lucky to have found him. The way she said it, with this undertone that suggested she knew something I didn't, or that she had some kind of special insight into Mark's character, made my blood boil, but I just smiled wider and told her thank you for being here to celebrate with us. If she noticed anything off about my demeanor or suspected that I might know about her secret meetings with Mark, she didn't show it. She was confident and comfortable, probably thinking she'd successfully inserted herself into my relationship and planted seeds of doubt in Mark's mind about whether he'd chosen the right sister, and now she could just sit back and wait for those seeds to grow. The reception started exactly on schedule at 6 p.m. at this beautiful historic venue downtown that we'd booked a year in advance. The room looked absolutely magical with the lighting and flowers and all the decorations that my actually supportive friends had helped me set up. Our first dance was to the song Mark and I had chosen together months ago, before I'd known about any of the Claire situation, and I let myself get lost in that moment and just feel the happiness of being married to someone I loved despite the complications. Then came dinner and the usual reception activities, toasts from my maid of honor and Mark's best man that were funny and sweet and made everyone laugh and cry in all the right places. Claire was sitting at a table with my parents and her husband Tom, who had no idea that his wife had kissed my now husband just weeks ago, and she kept catching my eye and smiling like we were sharing some kind of special sister moment. She had no idea what was coming, no clue that I'd spent weeks planning this moment, no concept that her entire world was about to be turned upside down in front of everyone she knew. I'd arranged with our DJ/videographer, a guy named Marcus who I'd paid extra and explained the entire situation to because I needed someone I could trust to execute this perfectly, to play a special video tribute after the cake cutting but before the dancing started. I'd told Mark we were showing a sweet montage of photos from our relationship that my bridesmaids had put together as a surprise, so he was expecting something sentimental and romantic. What I'd actually given Marcus was Dana's surveillance footage compilation, edited to show the progression of Mark and Claire's meetings, with timestamps and locations clearly marked, building up to that final devastating video of the kiss and Claire's speech about being the better option and waiting for Mark to realize he'd chosen the wrong sister. The video was about 8 minutes long, which I know sounds like an eternity to show at a wedding reception, but I'd had it edited in a way that was compelling and told a complete story so people wouldn't just tune out or get confused about what they were watching after we cut the cake and everyone had been served their slices. Marcus announced that the bride had prepared a special video to share with everyone, a look back at the journey that had brought us to this moment. The lights dimmed, and the video started playing on the large screens we'd set up around the room. And for the first 30 seconds, it actually was photos of Mark and me from throughout our relationship, smiling and happy at various events and trips we'd taken together. I watched Claire's face during this part, and she looked bored, probably thinking this was just typical wedding schmaltz that she'd have to sit through politely. But then the photos faded out, and the surveillance footage faded in. And I saw the exact moment Claire realized what she was watching because all the color drained from her face, and she looked at me with an expression of pure horror and disbelief. The room had gone quiet as people tried to figure out what they were seeing. These videos of Mark and Claire meeting at various locations. And then the audio kicked in with Claire's voice clearly telling Mark about her marriage regrets and how she wished she'd met him first.